He was too small. In June 1942, a 16-year-old boy, just 5'5" and weighing barely 110 pounds, walked into a U.S. Marine recruiting office. The recruiter didn't even look up before laughing him out the door. The Navy said he was too small. The Army paratroopers told him to go home and grow up. By every official standard, he was unfit for service, a walking flaw, like a P-38 that couldn't turn. But the recruiters made a fatal mistake. They saw a boy, not the weapon poverty had created. They didn't see the hunter's eyes of a kid who had kept his family alive through the Great Depression. His name was Audie Murphy, and within 30 months, that rejected teenager would become a one-man army, single-handedly destroying an entire German company by climbing onto a burning tank seconds from exploding. His story didn't begin on the battlefield. It began in the dust and hunger of Hunt County, Texas. Murphy was the 6th of 12 children. His father, a poor sharecropper, abandoned the family. His mother died of pneumonia when he was 16. Overnight, the undersized boy became the head of the household, the only provider for his younger siblings. His only tool was a .22 rifle. His only motivation, starvation. A neighbor recalled how the boy could drop a running rabbit at 50 yards with a gun most people couldn't hit a barn with. Murphy himself put it bluntly, "If I don't hit what I shoot at, my family doesn't eat tonight." Every bullet cost money they didn't have. Every miss meant hunger. Under that pressure, Audie didn't just learn to shoot, he learned to kill with precision. He developed a marksman's eye and an emotionless efficiency that would one day terrify German soldiers across Europe. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Audie saw his chance. The Army meant steady pay, food, and money to send home. But he was still 16, underage and underweight. After every branch rejected him, he forged an affidavit with his sister's help, claiming he was 18. The Army recruiter looked at the small, baby-faced boy, sighed, and stamped the papers. The U.S. Army had just accepted a field modification that would save hundreds of lives. Private First Class David Mercer, who trained with Murphy, later recalled, "We all thought he was a mascot. The drill sergeants called him Baby. But on the rifle range, those baby blue eyes went cold. He never missed, not once." In July 1943, Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment landed in Sicily. In the Rocky Hills, Murphy's true nature was revealed. His upbringing had taught him to move silently, use the terrain, and shoot with deadly calm. Near Palermo, his unit was pinned down by a German machine gun nest. The manual said, "Wait for support." Murphy's instinct said, "If I don't act, people die." He crawled forward alone, used grenades to wipe out the crew, then turned the captured gun on the retreating Germans. His captain recommended him for the Bronze Star, writing, "This soldier displays a natural aptitude for combat that is extraordinary." Extraordinary was an understatement. Audie Murphy had discovered something that would define and haunt him. He was exceptionally good at killing. Sicily was only the beginning. In Italy, he evolved from a good soldier into a nightmare for the Wehrmacht. At the Volturno River in October 1943, his squad was nearly annihilated by a counterattack. Instead of retreating, Murphy grabbed a borrowed sniper rifle and held the position alone. 5 Germans dead at 300 yards. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest decoration. Staff Sergeant William Polson described him best. "Murph didn't fight angry. That's what made him terrifying. He fought cold, like he was doing arithmetic. See a German, eliminate the German, move to the next. No emotion, no hesitation, just efficiency." Then came Anzio, the blood-soaked beachhead Churchill called the Wildcat. The enemy unleashed tanks, infantry's worst nightmare. Murphy didn't panic. He crawled forward, using the ground for cover, and fired his bazooka at point-blank range, destroying the tank completely. He earned his first Silver Star. He survived Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and Rome. He'd been wounded, promoted to sergeant, and earned a reputation that spread through the ranks. But August 1944 brought his greatest test. Near Montélimar, France, his platoon was ambushed. Their lieutenant, the only officer, was killed in the first volley. The chain of command collapsed. Murphy didn't wait for orders, he became the orders. 18 Americans faced a German company of more than 100. For 2 hours, Sergeant Murphy held the crossroads, directing his men, exposing himself to enemy fire, and personally killing at least 15 Germans. When it was over, the position still held. For his leadership, Murphy received a battlefield commission. On October 14, 1944, the scrawny boy who had been too small to enlist became Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy. But war takes a toll. By January 1945, Murphy was only 19, but looked 40. He'd survived nearly every major campaign in Italy and France. Most of his friends were dead or wounded. And yet, his hardest fight was still to come. By early 1945, Audie Murphy had already killed more than 100 enemy soldiers. But his greatest test came at the Colmar Pocket, the last German stronghold on French soil. Hitler had ordered it held at all costs and sent some of his best troops, the elite 2nd Mountain Division, veterans hardened by brutal winters in Norway. For Murphy's unit, Company B, the situation wasn't desperate, it was hopeless. In 5 days of savage fighting, Company B had lost 102 men. Every officer except Murphy was either dead or evacuated. Out of 187 soldiers, only 40 were still able to fight. Murphy himself had a fresh leg wound from shrapnel, but told no one. Private Anthony Abramsky later recalled, "We were finished. Most of us hadn't slept in 3 days. Half the guys had frostbite. Our machine guns were freezing up. The ground was frozen solid. You couldn't even dig a foxhole." On January 26, 1945, under a pale gray sky, the remnants of Company B lay strung out along the edge of the Holtzwihr. Before them stretched a mile of open, frozen ground, a killing field. Murphy positioned their only armor support, 2 M10 tank destroyers, along with his 40 exhausted men and a single field telephone to artillery, their last hope. At 1 p.m., the German artillery barrage began. Shells burst in the treetops, raining molten metal onto the frozen earth. For half an hour, the forest was shredded by fire. Then, at 1:40, the German attack came. Private First Class Donald Ekman saw them first, 6 tanks with pennants fluttering from their antennas, followed by 250 infantrymen in white snow camouflage moving across the field like ghosts. Murphy called for artillery support, but it couldn't stop them. The Germans were too numerous and too fast. At 600 yards, the M10s opened fire. Their shots went wide. The crews were exhausted, their hands numb with cold. German 88mm shells answered instantly. 1 tank destroyer took a direct hit and erupted in flames. The crew escaped, running for the woods. The other M10 tried to reposition, but slid into a drainage ditch, its tread spinning helplessly on ice. Its crew abandoned it too. By 2:20 p.m., both tank destroyers were out of action. The Germans were within 200 yards. The position was about to be overrun. Then, Lieutenant Murphy made a decision that defied every rule of combat. He ordered his men to fall back into the woods and ran forward himself. Through exploding shells and machine gun fire, he sprinted toward the burning M10. The vehicle was engulfed in black smoke, its rear section aflame, its hull packed with thousands of rounds of ammunition and 300 gallons of gasoline, a giant ticking bomb. Murphy didn't hesitate. He clammed onto the back of the burning destroyer and manned its 50-caliber machine gun. Silhouetted against the flames, he was an easy target for 6 tanks and hundreds of rifles. Private Anthony Abramsky, watching from the woods, later said, "I saw Lieutenant Murphy climb on that burning tank destroyer. It was the greatest display of guts and courage I've ever seen." The 50-caliber Browning was a fearsome weapon. In Murphy's hands, it became something else entirely, an instrument of surgical destruction. The hunter's eye he'd honed in the Texas cotton fields took over. For the next hour, the 19-year-old, 110-pound lieutenant became a one-man army. He fought methodically, not wildly, firing short, controlled bursts, calling artillery with one hand while squeezing the trigger with the other. Every shot counted. Sergeant Elmer Boll described it. The Germans got within 10 yards of him. He killed them wherever he saw them, in the ditches, in the open, in the trees. Those elite troops didn't know what hit them. The German tanks, which should have crushed the Americans, now stood immobilized, unable to advance without infantry support, and their infantry was being annihilated by a single unseen gunner hidden in smoke and fire. From the battalion command post, Technical Sergeant Morris Wold watched in disbelief. Murphy wasn't just spraying bullets. Every burst was aimed. He was picking them off like targets at a carnival. I saw him cut down an entire squad trying to flank us. The Germans hit the burning tank destroyer repeatedly. Shrapnel tore through Murphy's leg, his second wound of the day, but he ignored it. He just kept firing. He just kept calling in artillery. By 3:10 p.m., after nearly 40 minutes of non-stop firing, the .50 caliber began to slow. The ammunition was running out. The Germans sensed weakness and charged. Murphy grabbed his carbine and began shooting them one by one. As they closed to within 10 yards, Murphy made his final desperate move. He called for artillery fire directly on his own position. Lieutenant Walter Weisspfennig, the forward observer, refused. It would mean certain death. Murphy shouted into the phone, "I'm giving you a direct order. Fire on my position." The first 105mm shells landed 50 yards away, exploding with devastating force. The blasts ripped the German infantry apart, but Murphy, standing atop the burning wreck, was caught in the same maelstrom. His combined gunfire and artillery broke the attack. The remaining Germans, perhaps 100, turned and ran. The tanks, now exposed and leaderless, withdrew. By 3:20 p.m., the battle was over. In one impossible hour, Audie Murphy had stopped a German assault single-handedly. Audie Murphy's uniform was scorched, his leg bleeding, but he finally climbed down from the burning M10. 10 minutes later, it exploded. He walked calmly back to the tree line where his men waited. According to Private Abramsky, he was scary calm. Murphy simply asked if there were any casualties, made sure everyone was all right, then sat down, lit a cigarette, and asked for a status report. His hands never shook. That day, Audie Murphy killed or wounded roughly 50 German soldiers. Alone, he had stopped a combined assault by 250 elite troops and 6 tanks, saving his company from annihilation and securing his place in history. When the smoke cleared, German bodies lay scattered across the frozen field. The once proud 2nd Mountain Division, Hitler's elite Alpine veterans, was in full retreat. What came afterward was almost as remarkable as the battle itself: silence. In decades of research, historians combing through German archives, diaries, and veterans' accounts found virtually no first-hand record from those who attacked Holtzwihr that day. The absence itself is telling. The German army, built on pride and precision, simply erased the incident. The humiliation was unthinkable. 250 of their best troops and 6 tanks stopped cold by one undersized 19-year-old on a burning tank destroyer. The official German war diary offers only a sanitized line: "Attack on American positions near Holtz repulsed with heavy casualties. Enemy resistance heavier than expected." Heavier than expected, because the enemy was one man. Murphy had shattered their tactical logic. Superior numbers, better equipment, perfect planning, all undone by a farm boy's will. The consequences reached far beyond that snowy field. Murphy's stand held the line at the edge of the Kalmar pocket, breaking the last German resistance in Alsace. The following day, Holtzwihr fell, and within weeks, the entire German bridgehead west of the Rhine collapsed, 50,000 enemy troops lost, freeing Allied divisions for the final drive into Germany. The too small farm boy had just changed the map of the war. On June 2, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch awarded Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy the Medal of Honor. The citation, restrained in official language, could barely capture the event. Alone and exposed to fire from three sides, his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their attack to waver. For an hour they tried every weapon to eliminate him, but he held his position. When asked why he'd climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, Murphy answered simply, "They were killing my friends." He later explained, "It wasn't heroism. I figured if one man could do the job, why risk the others?" It was the same instinct as McKenna's piano wire repair or Simo Hauha's iron sights, a refusal to accept failure, a farmer's logic turned into battlefield genius. By war's end, Murphy's record was unmatched. He earned every American combat decoration for valor, some twice, including the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts, plus 5 foreign awards from France and Belgium. The boy once deemed too small for the Marines became the most decorated American soldier of World War II. When the fighting stopped, he returned home a national hero. He appeared on the cover of Life, led parades, and went to Hollywood, starring in more than 40 films, including To Hell and Back, where he portrayed himself. To the public, it was the perfect ending, the Texas farm boy who beat the Nazis and became a star. But the real war didn't end with victory. It followed him home. Behind the fame, Murphy carried invisible wounds. The man who had shown no fear atop a burning tank destroyer was now afraid of the dark. What doctors then called battle fatigue, we now know as PTSD. He suffered chronic insomnia, relentless nightmares, and slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He wasn't haunted by those he killed. He was haunted by those he couldn't save. He eventually stopped sleeping inside the house, choosing instead to stay in the garage with the lights on because darkness reminded him of night patrols. "I can't remember when I didn't have nightmares," he wrote. "They became part of my life, like breathing." Audie Murphy had survived the war, but he never truly left the battlefield. "A demon seemed to have entered my body," Audie Murphy once said. His first marriage, to actress Wanda Hendricks, lasted barely 16 months, destroyed by the same invisible wounds that medals couldn't cover. Hendricks later recalled that he was two people. In daylight, he was charming, generous, even funny. At night, he became someone else entirely, pacing the house with a loaded gun, fighting phantoms from a war that refused to end. For America, the Second World War was history. For Murphy, it never stopped. He was fighting a new enemy, one he couldn't see and couldn't shoot. Yet despite his own torment, he became one of the first and most courageous voices to speak for veterans' mental health. In the 1960s, when battle fatigue was still treated as weakness, Murphy shattered the silence. He publicly admitted his nightmares, insomnia, and flashbacks. In doing so, he again took the front line, this time against stigma and neglect. Writing in the Saturday Evening Post, he asked, "What about the veteran who can't? What about the thousands coming back from Vietnam with the same problems?" He was no longer fighting for Company B, he was fighting for every veteran still trapped in their own private war. But this time he wasn't alone. In 1951, Murphy married Pamela Archer, a 31-year-old former airline stewardess, who became the quiet hero of the second half of his story. She saw both men inside him, the celebrated soldier and the haunted survivor, and unlike others, she stayed. For 20 years, she was his anchor, his field modification against the chaos in his mind. Pamela endured the sleepless nights and the sudden flashbacks. She helped him raise 2 sons. And through it all, she supported his crusade for veterans. Murphy never stopped trying to help others, even as the war inside him raged on. Then, on May 28, 1971, the impossible happened. Audie Murphy, the man who had survived artillery barrages, ambushes, and firestorms, died at 45 in a plane crash in the Virginia mountains during a storm. America mourned its most decorated hero. For Pamela, though, the mission had only begun. She had seen what PTSD did to a generation of soldiers, and she refused to let their struggles be forgotten. After his death, she discovered another cruel truth. The most decorated soldier in U.S. history had died in debt. Poor financial management and bad investments had left his family with almost nothing. Pamela was 50 years old with 2 teenage sons and her husband's unpaid bills. This was her Colmar pocket, her own impossible battle. But she didn't surrender. She didn't write a tell-all memoir or sell his medals. Instead, she walked into the Sepulveda Veterans Affairs Hospital in Los Angeles and asked for a job. Not as a celebrity, but as a clerk, a patient liaison, a helper. That became her piano wire fix, her way of climbing onto the burning tank. For the next 35 years, Pamela Murphy dedicated her life to helping other veterans. She became a one-woman army inside the VA system, fighting bureaucratic indifference with quiet persistence and moral authority. When a doctor refused to see a veteran, she made the call. When paperwork was lost, she found it. When a benefits officer said no, she didn't leave the office until it became yes. From forgotten homeless vets to decorated officers, she treated them all with the same respect and compassion because in each of them she saw Audie's pain. Pamela Murphy became his final and most powerful field modification. She didn't just honor his legacy, she completed it. In 1973, the Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio was named for him. But his truest memorial was Pamela herself, a living testament to the promise he embodied, leave no man behind. Audie Murphy's 35-year legacy of service and compassion was only possible because of what happened on that frozen field in France, which leaves one final question: how? How did a 19-year-old boy weighing barely 110 pounds, already wounded by shrapnel, manage to stop an entire German assault alone? It wasn't magic, it wasn't a movie, it was a perfect storm. 4 factors that defined every piano wire fix: a brilliant mechanic, a fatal flaw, a reckless innovation, and a result so improbable it changed history. The first factor was the weapon. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun, designed by John Browning in 1918, was one of the finest heavy machine guns ever built. Each round could punch through an inch of steel armor and tear a man apart. It almost never jammed, even in freezing weather. In most soldiers' hands, it was a blunt instrument of suppression. In Murphy's, it became a scalpel. He wasn't spraying and praying, he was aiming. As witnesses testified, every burst was deliberate, every target chosen. He used the same cold, precise logic he'd learned hunting rabbits in the cotton fields of Texas. See a target, eliminate the target, move on. The second factor was location, the stupid one. To everyone else, the burning M10 tank destroyer was a death trap. To Murphy, it was an opportunity. He understood the hidden truth. The vehicle's 300 gallons of diesel fuel were burning, but the ammunition inside hadn't yet ignited. Diesel burned slow and thick, producing clouds of black smoke. The Germans knew someone was firing from that smoke, but they couldn't see him. What looked like suicide became cover. Murphy had turned a burning wreck into a smoking fortress, a temporary self-concealing bunker that also terrified his enemies. The third factor was the force multiplier. Murphy wasn't just a man behind a machine gun, he was an entire fire control system. While squeezing the trigger with one hand, he held a field telephone in the other, calmly directing 105mm artillery fire onto the advancing Germans. He wasn't fighting with one weapon, he was commanding many. The Germans weren't fleeing from a single gun, they were fleeing from the sky itself, which exploded all around them at his command. When he finally ordered, "Fire on my position," it was the ultimate act of tactical genius, sacrificing himself, if necessary, to destroy the enemy completely. The fourth factor was the hunter. Combat analysts later estimated that more than 10,000 rounds were fired at Murphy's position during that hour. Statistically, he should have been hit 15 to 20 times. He was struck once by shrapnel. This wasn't miracle, it was skill. Years of hunting taught him movement, concealment, and patience. He knew when to shift, when to pause, and how to let instinct replace fear. Psychologist Dr. Dave Grossman, an expert on combat behavior, would later call Murphy a perfect storm, a man forged by poverty and trauma, whose technical precision, emotional detachment, and fierce loyalty to his men fused into unstoppable focus. He wasn't fighting for glory or for medals, he was fighting for the lives of his friends. That was the stupid action that changed the war. A small, wounded farm boy climbing onto a burning tank and turning it into a fortress. The same field repair mentality that fixed a broken P-38 cable with piano wire had now stopped a German army. His true legacy had two parts. First, he shattered the stigma of psychological trauma. Because America's most decorated soldier openly said, "I have it," thousands of veterans realized they could ask for help. He gave them permission to be human. And second, there was Pamela Murphy, the woman who carried his mission forward. She worked at the VA hospital until she was 87, finally retiring in 2007. She never remarried. When she died in 2010, she was buried beside him at Arlington National Cemetery, the mechanic reunited with her pilot. The world saw a hero. Pamela saw a man. The recruiters saw a flaw. The army found a weapon. The Germans saw the impossible. Audie Murphy saw a problem and fixed it. The 110-pound farm boy who was once too small to be a soldier became the man who stopped an army to save his friends, and in doing so, he and the woman who loved him saved thousands more long after the guns went silent.